Further discuss this now with Eyre. He's a distinguished diplomatic fellow at the Middle East Institute and a former U.S. State Department senior policymaker for the Middle East and North Africa, and joins me live from Washington, D.C. Thank you, sir, for being with us on the program. First off, I want to get your thoughts on the increased military presence that we're seeing in the region. What's the probability of a U.S. attack on Iran?
The probability of a U.S. attack on Iran is very high. We've now reached the point, or will be reaching the point imminently, where we have in theater everything we could possibly need for an attack on Iran. We have, to use a term in the military, we've set the table. So I would say that, especially given the fact that negotiations haven't really moved at all, that the possibility of a U.S. attack on Iran is quite high.
Trump seems to be using the tactic of strength through power by constantly threatening Iran to strike some sort of a deal of their liking. But is it going to work? I mean, how far is Iran willing to go in making changes, particularly in its nuclear program?
No, it's not going to work. This administration, this U.S. administration, has painted itself into a corner. It assumed mistakenly that if it showed enough military power, Iran would change its red lines. But the reality is that Iran is more concerned about capitulating to the U.S. and showing weakness and inviting further aggression than it is of a military attack. So we're past the point where Iran is convinced that the U.S. is willing to attack. It knows it is, but unfortunately, it seems willing to accept that instead of changing its own red lines.
And there are also other issues that Trump wants to address. He's made a long list, like Iran's defense capabilities. I mean, it started off with the protests, went to the nuclear details, and then continued with its defense capabilities. But Iran said that apart from its nuclear program, everything else would be a red line. Why do you think that we're seeing the U.S. extend that list on things it wants to see change in Iran?
Well, actually, it started with what still is the biggest issue for the U.S. administration, the nuclear issue. President Trump, like all presidents, has always said, we will not accept an Iranian nuclear weapon. The difference between this administration and previous ones is that he is now willing to accept any enrichment of uranium on Iranian soil, whereas previous U.S. administrations were. So just reaching an agreement between the two sides on that issue is very tough. But as you said, because the U.S. thinks Iran is weaker now, and it is, as a result of last year's 12-day war with Israel, it was adding on things to its list of demands to include limitations on Iran's missile program and its support for regional proxies. And a lot of this has been after consultation with Israel. I don't think protesters were ever on the Trumpian agenda, but the more maximalist the U.S. demands are, the less likely Iran is to accept them.
How big of an impact do you think Israel has had over what we've seen unfold over the last couple of weeks?
Over the last couple of weeks, very big impact. I mean, Israel had a very big impact in terms of decreasing the strategic threat Iran posed to the region in the last year or so. And in the last couple of weeks, Prime Minister Netanyahu, whose goal is the existential destruction of this Iranian regime, not just limitations on nuclear, not just limitations on missiles and proxies. He wants this regime gone. And he's been in close consultation with the White House, trying to convince President Trump that no deal with Iran is worth the paper it's written on, and that he should have the same set of goals that Israel has, which is collapsing this regime.
Okay, Eyre, thank you so much for being with us here on TRT World and sharing that analysis with us.